He's Howard Ibach, former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about advertising, creative briefs, and briefing. Today, Henry, we have a guest from Minneapolis. She is the Chief Operating Officer of Carmichael Lynch, a legacy agency. Her name is Stacy Janicki. Let's join the conversation. Here we are. Henry, we are back. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Stacy Janicki, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Carmichael Lynch in Minneapolis. I have a very soft spot for Minneapolis. I spent a number of years there working at Carlson Marketing Group and then Campbell Mithun, both of which have shut their doors. It wasn't my fault. Don't blame me.
I was there too, twice. So
okay, well, so then it was your fault.
Yeah.
And this is a new position. Carmichael Lynch created this Chief Operating Officer position for Stacy. She's been there for 12 years. This is a legacy agency in Minneapolis that I know the city is proud to have as one of its corporate citizens. And we were talking just before I hit the record button, I went onto YouTube and reviewed a couple of spots that I don't know if we could say it launched Carmichael Lynch, but was certainly one of the founding campaigns that I remember from my childhood was for Hams, the land of sky blue waters, with amazing animation and a jingle that we still remember to this day. I mean, I'm not a beer drinker, but I remember it, and we want to talk about that in a minute. But anyway, Stacy, thank you so much for joining Henry and me on the Brief Brothers. We are delighted to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We want to cover a lot of territory today, but we like to start off by asking our guests to give us a little bit of background about where how you got started, what drew you into advertising. We don't talk to a lot of account management professionals, so that's really nice to have this area in our industry covered. We've talked to a few, but Henry and I love talking about the brief and strategy and creative. You play a huge role in helping foster that as well. So give us a little bit of background. How did you get started?
Yeah, I went to University of Notre Dame on a basketball scholarship, kind of helped put Notre Dame women's basketball on the map, which is fun to see how it's taken off in recent years.
Guard, forward, or center?
I'm a 6 foot tall point guard, but played just about every position but center. So
okay, remind us not to play pickup with you anytime soon.
I had the opportunity in high school, I grew up here in Minnesota, to do some student broadcasting for the local affiliate that would broadcast like state tournament games, and kind of got the bug and thought I wanted to be, a sports broadcaster. And so was a film kind of TV major in college, interned with the NBC affiliate as a reporter while I was still in college, and quickly decided, and this is the good thing about internships, that it was definitely not what I wanted to do. Being someone that came from a sports background, there was not a team. It's very like competitive, cutthroat. There wasn't the kind of a sense of team. And so I made the decision to pivot. I had graduated in 3 years and still had eligibility to play basketball. So I worked my master's in counseling psychology while still at Notre Dame. And once again, decided I was fascinated by it, but I didn't want to be a therapist. And so it was a really weird point of which I'm like, I graduated and I'm like, now what do I do? The 2 things I thought I wanted to do proved to be dead ends. But like, interestingly, they both were foundationally the anchors for advertising because, I think journalism is storytelling, and it's about how you tell, human interest stories, and tap into emotions, and psychology is all about understanding how human behavior works. So in a weird way, I feel like I stumbled into, preparing myself for a career in advertising. Got a job at Campbell Mithun right out of college. 800 people at that agency was huge. And the Minneapolis ad scene was just burgeoning, right? It was Campbell Mithun and Carmichael Lynch and Fallon and Periscope. And it was definitely like a really great place as a young person in the industry to cut my teeth on really great brands. And that's how I got into this business.
So you've been with Carmichael Lynch now for a dozen years. What was your progression? How did you start at Carmichael?
Yeah, started 12 years ago as director of account management. I had come over from Cole McBoy, and before that was at Martin Williams, and before that was at Camel Theoretical. I've hit all the major holding companies between
Yeah.
Stagwell and Omnicom and IPG. And I've been fortunate, to be able to call Minneapolis home that whole time and work at really great agencies with great people and work on good pieces of business.
When I moved to Minneapolis in 2003, at the time, it was about 20 years, that was 20 years ago. I did a little checking, and I found that Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, was the 6th largest advertising market in the country. And by that, I think that the definition of that is that it had in terms of ad spend, the number of corporate headquarters in Minneapolis, the infrastructure, education, the
Yeah.
number of major agencies. And, having come from Los Angeles, which was, I think, 20 something in terms of size, I was blown away. Now, I don't know what it is today, but I'm convinced that it's still it's underestimated in terms of its ranking,
Yeah.
but I'm sure it's a powerhouse. Are you
Well, look,
familiar with where?
Yeah, I think it's from an advertising standpoint, I think I've heard as high as 6, and it's fluctuated, right?
Right.
But it's interesting. I think, what recruiters have always told me is it's the hardest place to recruit to if you're not from Minnesota because of I was going to say the perceptions of winter, but let's be honest, not
Right.
perception. But it's the hardest place to recruit from because once you get here, once you get established, and I'm like, for anyone that's, turned on the TV this week and, seeing like the DNC coverage in Chicago, you'll see Minnesota pride runs deep and Minnesotans like nothing more than things from Minnesota. So there's, I think once you kind of get that in, and I think it's like, it's always been a creative community. I think I remember the stat is like per capita, we have more theaters than
Yes.
New York City. We have a ton of like post-production companies here in town. There's a lot that the acting community is strong. So it's, there's a lot of museums. So there's, the fiber of this community is built upon creativity and artists. So it feels like it was only a natural place for advertising to kind of take hold as well.
When Henry and I started the Brief Brothers in January 2021, we started by doing discussions amongst ourselves. What do we do to fix the brief? How do you do this? How do you do that? And it was lots of nuts and bolts. And I said, we're not going to be able to sustain this because there's only so much you can talk about the actual brief. We need to invite guests. And it was so easy for me to reach out to my friends and colleagues in Minneapolis because it was robust. There were so much talent to tap into. And over the last, 3.5 years that Henry and I have been doing this, we come back to Minneapolis because it's still, Luke Sullivan has come on, Tim Holmes, has come on. And I lose track of how many names and talents from the client side, from the creative side, from the strategy side. It's just a wide berth of talent. And awesome. I think it's maybe too bad that the perception of Minneapolis isn't as robust as the talent that lives there.
Yeah, it's it's a little bit seen as flyover country, but it's interesting because we've been in some pitches where big, huge, multi-million-dollar type AOR accounts have told their procurement companies and the search consultants they've hired to lead pitches that they don't want agencies from the coast sometimes. Like there is a little bit of like a mentality of that might be an outdated perception, right? But like there's a humility. I would actually think sometimes agencies in Minnesota like maybe don't do enough to have a little swagger, but there's a humility to how you work and, not being, not assuming to have all the answers and wanting to partner with people that is a little different. And I don't think maybe that's more Midwestern than it is just Minnesotan, but there's a little bit of that, right?
I would agree with that. I haven't really had a lot of agency counterparts from Minneapolis or the Twin Cities, but I did work a lot with colleagues from Chicago, and I found that to be the case. I think the coasts are so in their own bubble. I think it's very easy for creatives to get into their own bubble on the
Yeah.
coasts, that they don't necessarily see the forest from the trees, and recognize, that there is a whole big country out there, and that not everybody shares their beliefs and values, and you talking about humility, you have to be humble enough to understand that the audience that you're talking to isn't you.
Yeah. Right.
And so,
Right.
yeah.
It's
Well,
true.
I want to give our viewers a chance to see some of the work that, has brought wonderful attention to Carmichael Lynch. I haven't had the chance to work at Carmichael. I worked at a couple of agencies in Minneapolis, as I alluded to at the beginning of the conversation. And I'm not up to speed on the latest and greatest of websites, but I went to your website and I was kind of blown away by how fun it is to navigate. So I want to
Oh,
just
that's
take a
good to
minute.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe I don't know what your perception of it is. It looks pretty cool. I'm just going to do a little screen share, and you tell me. I found a couple of things projects that you did and work that you've done for some major brands.
Yeah.
That I think is laudable, and I don't know how much of all this has won awards, but you've done some
Yep.
great work for Subaru. You've done great work for the Twins, the Minnesota
Mm-hmm.
Twins. Um, I thought this stuff with Josh Groban for the
It's
baked
fun.
beans was laugh out loud funny.
Yeah. Super fun.
I mean,
The
yeah,
crew that was interesting. I actually worked on that one, and it was a hoot because we're like, okay, let's make beans part of cultural currency again. And it struck us that the thing that beans are probably most famous for is the fart song that we all learned in elementary school.
yeah,
So we're like, what if we worked with a singer-songwriter that could talk about, and by the way, Bush's was trying to evolve beyond just being seen as a baked bean company, because multicultural eating is like skewed towards beans, right? As the basis of a lot of different kind of ethnic cuisines. And the protein benefits, obvious, of beans are having a moment. And then there's the environmental impact. We're like, okay, what if we could like talk about all of these benefits of beans, talk about their whole portfolio in a really fun way, and get a singer-songwriter to basically write that song. So Josh Groban, stepped up, and it was great. It was like right at the beginning of COVID. So all of this was kind of happening remote, but we worked with the,
and his quote, if I can find the quote
yeah,
here,
yeah,
he said the Bean song was a very W2F, but he said it was so much fun.
yeah, no, it was awesome.
So,
We worked with the guys, one of the guys that founded Portlandia, that was like, also worked on all the SNL shorts. And you can see that in the music video. Like, we wanted that kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of humor. So it was a lot of fun. That was in the first remote shoot we had done, because in COVID, and there was daily testing, and the whole thing could have fallen apart if they wouldn't have tested positive in those early days. But we pulled it off, and it was great fun.
well, let me just play a couple seconds of this. I've got this. I'll unmute it and we'll listen or watch.
When I was a little boy, the kids could be so laughing at what was in my lunch pail. They'd yell about the musical fruit. They'd say the more that I ate, the more I'd but I swear that they've never made me do that. I'd zip my beans up and roll like the wind, just wishing that I'd belong. And if I could take me back in time, I'd sing that bearded boy this song.
Okay, so now this is more than, is this a 60 or a 90 or
It was actually a feature length film that was created like as a full music video. So I think it was like just under 3 minutes. And then we did
dropped on
obviously
social
cut
media?
downs. Yeah, then we did cut downs for social media and all things, but we hosted it on YouTube, hosted it on the client site. Yeah, and Josh Groban wrote the music, wrote the lyrics, produced it all on his like garage band on his computer in the course of like a day. It was like, he's a really talented guy.
So
And
how
you
does
he
had
did
that,
say,
a
like,
lot of fun.
yeah, he said like he vividly recalls as a kid his he loved beans, and his mom packed a thermos of beans to take to school, and he kind of got mocked by kids. So he kind of took some of his own like childhood memories, and they kind of manifested in the song he wrote. So
So how did that work in terms of, you said he wrote it, so in
yeah.
terms of briefing him, like what sort of brief did he get, and how is it like briefing an outside talent like that as opposed to like a copywriter or a creative team?
It was different. It's like you wanted, the minute anything whiffed of feeling too commercial, Josh wasn't super interested. Like even that song, like it was never full of like, in fact, I don't think if you listen to that, I don't think the full 3 minutes he says bushes.
No, he
There's a
doesn't.
couple like can reveals, and that was purposeful. And he didn't want it to seem like it was a shill. He wanted it to be more a fun piece of content that just could live out into the world. And I think the brief was more like, hey, here's what we're trying to do with the company. For years, like literally, I think 30 years, Donor worked with Bush's on the talking dog campaign, right? The secret recipe. And there was that iconic line, roll that beautiful bean footage of, the talking dog. And the transformation we wanted to do is take it from that line that was really grounded in baked beans to that beautiful bean company. And talking about, so what we said was like, hey, if we're trying to reposition this company of having, being, this product portfolio of beans that have all of these benefits, how do we capture that? So if you listen to the whole length, there's a piece where he's kind of like almost in a classroom, drying protein chains and talking about the health benefits. And there's another one where he's talking about how it gives him energy, whatever. So in a fun sort of way, he was able to build in like bean RTBs into the video, but done in a way that didn't feel too heavy-handed, or maybe so heavy-handed that they were comical and how over the top it was.
So give me another brand that you work on, and let's take a look.
Yeah, Subaru. If you can see that, there's a spot of a father. There's a key image, right? If you go down there, of a guy, there's a little boy wearing a backpack, and his
This one?
dad. So that was shortlisted at Cannes this summer, and it's
Oh,
beautiful.
nice.
It was shortlisted for sound design, and yeah, I'll let you watch it.
Oh, wow.
The world is full of beautiful places. We got a Subaru to reach the ones that make us feel something more.
The Subaru Forester Wilderness. Subaru is the National Park Foundation's largest corporate donor, helping expand access for all.
Wow.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
it's a beautiful spot. It's really interesting. That young actor who's just amazing was actually nominated. We actually cast him right before he kind of blew up. He was nominated for an Emmy. He was in the HBO Max show. What's the name of the program? That's based on the video game that kind of took off a year ago.
Well, now I've read that you are up on everything
And I can't come up with the name of the show, but yeah, so he starred in that.
I'm not, so I'm not going to be able to help you there.
Yeah.
But that
So
is
anyways,
that's an extraordinary.
cool.
Yeah, and I can see this. I can hear.
Yeah.
The quality of that sound composition for that spot.
Well, and the
really-
brief
really
on that
puts-
one, which was so great, is we have a long-standing partnership with the national parks, and they wanted us to do a spot that was about kind of access and getting people to the parks. And what a beautiful way to tell that story, right? Through the lens of this father and his son, which speaks to access in more ways than one. So
Okay.
Great,
Well,
great stuff.
yeah, I again, I'm not the latest and up to date on website design, but I was impressed with how that how engaging your website is and how easy it is to navigate. And it's just kind of fun. It's just different.
Yeah.
So you said earlier something that Henry and I have talked about a lot, and that is that when we talk to our guests about how they found their way to advertising, there is a common thread that runs through almost
A
everyone's
circuitous
background.
route.
The circuitous route. It's like I didn't go directly from college right into advertising, although a
Right.
lot of young people these days are doing that because there are more programs out there. And I've been affiliated with one, the Hubbard School, the University of Minnesota,
Yeah.
has a great program, and I've been a guest speaker with one of the senior lecturers there for the last many years. So it's fun to talk to young people. And Henry and I have found other programs like that here in the United States as well as in the UK, where we talk to young people. So is it still a challenge for you to recruit young talent to Carmichael?
Actually, no. I feel like
That doesn't surprise me.
yeah, and like honestly, we get a lot of our talent from that program you were talking about. That
The Hubbard
Stratcom
School?
program is pretty new. Like I think that was started an old boss and mentor of mine, Steve Wernberg, chaired that for a while. And then Mark Jensen, who's there, and a
Yep.
lot of great former agency
Emil Mathuner?
folks kind of built that up. And I mean, that's the benefit of having such a community that's so strongly rooted in advertising is like the pipeline is there to go talk to students, to go talk to programs. But I think there's an interest in, I usually get through like our internship window where I think this year we had 400 applicants to fill 13 positions. And usually we're sitting there thinking like, oh God, I want to be able to call there's like 10 kids I want to call and give an offer to. So it strikes me, and I try to tell people if they don't get it. It's funny. There's one woman who had applied 2 years in a row, and she was one of 5 finalists both times. And she called and asked my advice afterwards and said, "What am I doing wrong?" And I said, "You need to reframe that and say, what are you doing right? If there's 400 applicants and it's a blind process, and we're no longer back in the days where, oh, this is my neighbor's kid, or this is the CEO of our client's, son or cousin that's wants a job." Like, to get as far as you did says you're doing something right. And sometimes it's just about at bats. And if you don't end up at your dream agency, then you work your way up, and you just got to get your foot in the door and, keep like chasing your dreams. So I think it's it's like one of those interesting industries that you need some experience to parlay like the next opportunity. And historically, I think agencies have been bad about welcoming divergent kind of experiences that actually would make the agency kind of collective knowledge and experience stronger, because we've only looked to staff from other agencies. And I think as we've kind of said, oh, maybe we tap into people who have had client side jobs, or people that had a research position or worked in a nonprofit. You start getting more of diversity of thought that I just think makes the work stronger.
What's your take on the present and future of the advertising agency business? Because there's so much doom and gloom in our trade press, among, go on LinkedIn, everything this is dead, it's dying, it already died, and we're just like feeding off the carcass. Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I guess I'm not as doom and gloom, because I think if we were to sit here and talk about the brands we still love, at its core, they're brands that still have like a big organizing idea that differentiates them and is, now maybe it's not like for us that grew up, I can identify with like the commercial, the print ad that I hung on my wall. Now it shows up in different ways, how brands are showing up in activations or sponsorships. But none of those things live if there's not an organizing idea that drives them. And if there's not an insight behind that. Like this Subaru campaign is a great example. They've been our client for 16 years. I always think it's funny, like, love, it's what makes Subaru a Subaru. It feels like such a flat-footed statement. And I have to imagine, whoever 16 years ago unveiled that in a client meeting, the client could have easily asked, well, can Honda say this? And there was reasons why they couldn't, and we could own it. But then it's just about embedding meeting into something and doing it enough over time and not giving up on it, not having the client give up on the idea or the agency, and the agency not giving up on love, such that we can build a system such that our sponsorships are around that, their promotions are around, and at the end of the day, we're just inextricably linked to the idea of love. And I have, 3 kids that are now all, in their 20s and grown adults, and they all want Subarus now because of what that brand stood for and stands for. And 15 years ago, I don't think a 25-year-old would have said, I really want to drive a Subaru. And for anyone who thinks brand and advertising not a part of that needs to check themselves a little bit.
It's funny because there are a handful of brands out there who have stuck by their most fundamental brand building blocks.
Yeah.
We know that there are plenty who walked away, and it's baffling. I worked for a number of years at Team One Advertising in El Segundo in the mid 90s, little less than 10 years after the agency was launched to do all the work for Lexus.
Yeah.
And I worked for Tom Cordner. And Tom was the guy who wrote the line, the relentless pursuit of perfection, which doesn't exist anymore. And I lament this, not every episode, but many episodes.
Yeah.
And, most people don't even know what the current tagline is today. And, even taglines are not something that every brand embraces, even though you can build so much equity around it.
Yeah.
We can complain about the dearth of great advertising, although I think it's just not true. There's plenty of examples, as you've alluded to, of brands that have stuck with their guns and have built that brand. Subaru is just one of them. We've had, as one of our guests in very early on was Greg Benedek, who has this post on LinkedIn called, and help me out here, Henry, so it's like great advertising, how I miss you, or something like that. And every day or every couple of days, he posts another ad a vintage ad from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and laments like, where's this advertising? And I get it. I get it, but I don't agree with the premise. And I don't think Henry and I think Henry and I share that view. It's like, yeah, there's been great advertising, but
well, it's like anything else. It's like anything else historical. We're too close to it, right? To be able to, to be able to look at it and say, oh, that was great. But, in 10 years, there'll be something from now. And that's the thing. It won't be every campaign. It'll be 1 or 2 campaigns out of the hundreds or thousands that we'll remember that defined a decade. And we'll say, why don't they do stuff like that anymore? And so there's always been that bell curve of, some really amazing advertising, some really horrible advertising. And a lot of it is just kind of in the middle. And some of it does hard work for the brands. And if they don't screw up and they stick with their brand codes, it can be effective and help brands to continue to thrive. But those like outstanding examples of work, I think are the ones that they're outstanding for a reason, is because they're like in the top 1%.
Well, look, I think there's always going to be a home for good ideas. The analogy I use is people have been saying for 10 years and kind of bemoaning the death of television, right? Which is kind of a bit of a misnomer, because traditional viewership is down, but overall viewership and consumption of content is up, even as people are on their phones more. But how the mechanism, the vehicle of which the content is being distributed has changed, right? We might watch it on Netflix, you might watch it on your phone instead of your 34-inch screen. But if at the end of the day those streaming services don't have good content, it means nothing. And I would argue the last 5 years have seen a renaissance. It's like the new golden age of quote unquote television, whether you want to call it television or not. But like, if you look back, at the 80s, and then you stack up like what I'll call the content that now is being put out, the ideas are there, the strength, like Succession and White Lotus. And I mean, there's beautiful content being made. It's just being delivered in a different way. And that's advertising too. Like, the agencies that are going to survive are the agencies that figure out how to leverage the new mechanisms and the new delivery methods of reaching consumers. And people that want to cling to the traditional means of doing so are probably not going to be, around much longer.
I want to unpack a couple of things you said there, because one is, I heard this quote, I thought it was brilliant. I don't remember who said it. They said, TV is not dying, it's having babies. And I believe YouTube is probably the biggest television network in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's just how you define television. The other thing that is interesting to me is how, we've seen the pendulum always swings. And I think that the thing with creativity is when everybody's doing something, when you do something else, that gets noticed. And so like we have like all this, short form, very, 6-second ads. But then when you drop in a long form piece like that Josh Groban, all of a sudden it stands out out in the crowd. And I think you can do effective advertising in 6 seconds, and I think you could do effective advertising in 3 minutes. And it all depends. Talking about great contemporary advertising, this goes back, I don't know, maybe 7-8 years, but Dollar Shave Club, the video that went viral that basically created the brand Dollar Shave Club, that was a brilliant piece of advertising. And ultimately he was able to sell to one of the competitors and made himself rich, very rich.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that there's still a lot of opportunity, again, to zig when everybody else is zagging, and I agree. TV, I mean, we could throw away that, we could call it video, whatever, but YouTube ads look a lot like TV ads to me. Like nobody's going to and ads that I hear on Spotify sound a lot like the ads I hear on radio.
Yeah.
And last I checked, I'm pretty sure it's still the case. Terrestrial AM FM radio was the medium with the largest reach in the country. So it's, people are in their car and they turn on the radio. It's still there. It's not sexy, but I think that's one of the problems with the industry is we're too concerned with what's sexy and what's new, as opposed to, oh, this is just that in a different flavor.
I don't even own a television, but I probably watch more television now than I ever have because I watch it on my iPad.
Okay.
And I can almost quote you chapter and verse, for a Dawn dishwashing detergent commercial, because I've seen it so many damn times on YouTube. I have a buddy who's seen it too, and he's like, I actually went out and started buying Dawn dish just because of the claims. And it's like, okay, well, it's like what was that?
Is
old
it the
spot?
turbo wash? Because the turbo wash is good.
Might be. I just try to turn it off. I just like I don't want to hear it anymore. But it's like the old spot for
true advertising, man.
Yeah. It's like, remember that spot for, was it Certs? Two mints in one. I mean, I don't even know what it, I might even have the wrong brand, but that little jingle, that little
Certs had Retsin.
That's right. So it's something that if you hear it often enough, even if it's terrible, and Henry, what's that? You've referred to a spot that the headache rub.
Head on, apply directly to forehead. Head on, apply directly to forehead.
That's all I did is I said it over and over and over again. And this is basically
that ad gave me a headache.
Yeah, it's basically Joseph Goebbels' theory of propaganda. You just say it over and over and over again, and people just will start believing it, even if it's not true.
That's horrible advertising. But I think, and I'm not original in saying this, like, doing a horrible ad isn't the worst thing in the world that you could do. Like, if it gets noticed, that's doing a lot more than a lot of just the bland advertising that people skip and never comment on. So, I mean, sometimes being corny is a mechanism for breaking through.
So Stacy, what's it like working with your creatives? Do you have a daily conversation with them? Do you work with them intimately? What's that like for you?
I think it varies by creative and it varies by account. But I think, we're pretty integrated here. One thing that's, I think, changed over the years is used to have a creative brief, and now it's like we have a kickoff, and that brief informs media, PR, social, creative, and so we're all operating off the same brief, and we're all trying to kind of build on ideas. I think there's less moments than there used to be back in the day, a day of like big reveals, right? Like I literally started, I've sometimes said to people on my team that are younger, if it's on the rail, it's for sale. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? And I realize agencies don't have conference rooms with rails where you'd put like the foam core boards up. And you'd turn them over for the clients.
Supramax, or what is it? Letramax Super Black. Those black
Yes.
presentation boards.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there was whole rooms where you'd spray foam core, and someone's job was to just, paste ads on foam core for presentations. And pizza cases you'd check out, right?
Oh, yeah. You had to put those on the airplane. That was tough.
Yeah, I think it's now more like working with your team first, figuring out. And I think this whole goes back to like media being more neutral, as you start first at like creative strategies, right? Like it might not even be a line, but it's a territory and a written manifesto and maybe a couple ad-like objects, like an ad lob, where you can get a feel for the tone, for the positioning space, and just, trying to kind of have it be more iterative until you kind of figure out like what you're actually making and where it's going to live in the world, just kind of figuring out if that space feels right, if it's the right strategy, if it's the right tone. And I think working like that helps. And it helps too if you can, not only internally as an account person, to see something when it's in more of its early stages, but getting clients to see it. We used to call them tissue sessions and still do to this day. But that notion of like a client's fingerprints being on something before it becomes a storyboard is great, because then they feel vested in it. They've weighed in on it. So, it's funny, our chief creative officer, Marty Sen, he said something, we were in a pitch last week, and he said something to clients, which I thought was really fascinating, which is, this is going to look way more finished than it should. Because pitching is like one-handed clapping, right? Like usually you'd be talking to a client, you'd be working on the brief. You wouldn't even kick off a team until your clients approved the creative brief. And pitching is artificial like that. Like in some ways it's good. You don't really have the guardrails. But now, because of Photoshop, because of AI that can be used, not even on the final form, but I think everyone's using AI from what I'll just call like conceptual kindling to be able to create boards, to create ad lobs. It ends up looking really finished. Whereas it used to be, it would be an illustration, a piece of like a scrap material that would be illustrative.
We've talked about that a lot. And for me, I think that it's been bad that we've trained clients to basically expect finished ads, and it's been incremental over time, right? Because you're right. In the beginning, you would have an illustration, right, and say, this is what it will look, imagine what it will look like. And then we got, Photoshop and the Quark Express, and started giving them comp layouts, with FPO printed on the image or whatever. And then, we started getting really good stock imagery and doing that. And then now we have AI, and you can basically generate whatever you want. And in a way, I think it takes the discussion away from the idea and the concept into executional details that this AI image has that might be objectionable or whatever, instead of like, hey, is this the idea? Let's forget about, what the talent is actually going to look like, or don't let the fact that the talent is blonde hair, blue eyes dissuade you from the idea. We could swap that out and put in the brunette later. I think that we've trained clients to kind of be more superficial in that way.
I guess I would find most clients at least know that what they're looking is just representative. I think the hard part is it makes it, I don't want to say it devalues the time and the cost for the craft of advertising, but it almost makes it seem easier than it is, right? Because the art of putting together a comp is very different than when you go sit in a photo shoot all day and then you want to retouch things and you want to get things just right, and the lighting has to be that way. And like there's still a craft to that is time intensive, and you want to work with good production partners. And I think the expectation is everything should be cheaper and be made faster, and that's not that's not always, I was gonna say, it's not always the
Well,
case. It's rarely the case, right?
well, we've also kind of stumbled into another topic, which is how social media has kind of devalued, right? Like where all these, influencers or whatever, they're shooting stuff on handheld on their phone,
Yeah.
low audio quality, um, you know, and we were all trained and grew up in an industry that was very caring about, the craft of film, of radio, of
Yeah.
photography. And now it's like, well, anybody can do this. And I think it does devalue the experts. Like anybody can do a video, but not everybody can do a beautiful film. And so
And in
I
fact, you on some social media like TikTok, where I've got a page, they will frown on high production values.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep, that's
If you're
right.
not rough and tumble, it's like,
Yep.
what are you pulling? You're trying to pull the wool over my eyes here. What are you doing?
but
It's kind of crazy.
but I do think, and I think this is just a theme in general, speaking about all of these topics that we've been talking about, is pendulum swings.
Mm.
I think we're in the middle of this now, and eventually, you know, the influencer craze will subside, and we'll rediscover suddenly the principles of good advertising, and some clients will rediscover, the fact that they need a really professional agency that knows what it's doing, strategically sound, creatively excellent. And we'll see, just like we saw, you see swings of going in-house at agencies, and then you can look through the archives of Ad Age, how many big brands announced to great pomp and circumstance that they were going to go in-house, and then quietly,
Yeah.
or zoom fast 5 years later, and they're having a review. Well, what happened? Well, it got stale. They got too myopic. They couldn't recruit the talent that, the big agents, and they needed outside counsel. And I always liken it. We've said it many times. I've said it many times on the show that, you hire an agency. If you're a big brand, you hire an agency for the same reason you hire a litigation firm if you're going to trial, right? You have in-house counsel, and they're good for certain things, contracts, stuff like that. But if you're going to litigate, that's a highly specialized thing where you need the expert counsel. And I think advertising is like that. You have to have somebody whose head is outside in the world and not necessarily always, knee deep in your business, because that to me is a recipe for disaster in advertising.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to your discussion about the brief, because I think it's fascinating to hear you talk about, if I heard you correctly, Stacy, that there is a highly collaborative approach to the brief. If like I said, if I was understanding you, what is Carmichael's attitude? What is their approach to brief writing? And are your strategists free to take their own approach, or is there an agency philosophy toward briefing? Talk to us about that.
I think the philosophy is that it's very rare I'll see, like when I was cutting my teeth at CPG agencies back in the day, there was a one sheeter and it was like, what's the big idea? What are the reasons to believe? We do briefing documents, not briefs. And we try not to narrow it down. Our agency motto is come together, stand apart. And what we're really trying to find is opportunities for brands to stand apart. The come together thing is just the working in integration. So it might be like comprised of multiple things happening. Like, it's like you're trying to find the crux in that intersection between what's true to the brand and what's true to culture. And I think sometimes I've worked at places where clients will push you to think too much about what's true to the brand. And then you're just talking in an echo chamber. And other times, if you're trying to kind of catch the kind of cultural zeitgeist moment of what's happening in the world, you might forget to talk about how the brand plays a role in that. So it's looking at the intersection of both, and that becomes then that strategic springboard for all of our teams. And I would take like we have a dairy brand that sells cheese sticks, and it's like the largest selling Frigo cheese heads you know, it's the best-selling cheese stick brand in the US. And the creative team got the brief and the media team got the brief, and the media team took it and said, well, it's all about self-expression. Do you chomp? Do you know, do you pull strips? Do you do like, it's all about like creativity and eating the cheese stick. They created their own media partner brief based off that creative brief, took it to media vendors and figured out how to create, you know, really bespoke integrations, and ended up winning, you know, media plan of the year from Adweek and Brand Week. And you know, I think it's really interesting how like a media team can interpret a brief and then it results into like award-winning work for media teams, because we worked with Twitch, right? Where like young kids are watching videos, and we embedded within Minecraft and Roblox, like, you know, branded characters, and really got inside kind of in deep with these partnerships with these media companies. So I think when you brief entire kind of teams and not just the creative team, it's really fun to see how that integration can play out. Because I think creativity can be, you know, can be executed across any discipline. So I think that's kind of a benefit of it too. But I'm kind of glad we kind of have moved away from a brief and a sheet of paper and more about a deck that like inspires teams to think about the different places the brand can go, with some thought starters, some, you know, how it's relevant in culture, how it's relevant to the brand. I think there's still clients that want that neat, tidy one sheet of paper. So we'll do that, because it's still good to have like understand what we're working against in a succinct way. But I think the aperture has been opened more on briefs in a way that's good and feels less limiting.
There's something there to unpack that I want to explore. And you know, so the media team had its own spin on the brief and created some work. Explain to me what you mean by, what was the work that they created? Did they take the work from the creative department and apply it? Explain that to me.
No, I mean, they literally kind of recapped what the campaign idea was and created an RFP for media partners and shopped them and said, okay, we want you to pitch to us. What would you do if you knew this was the campaign idea? And, you know, we ended up then, you know, the media companies would come back and say, hey, we could do X, Y, and Z. We're like, okay, let's talk about that more. And then they'd even pull in the creative team to figure out. Roblox was a good example of that. I don't have young kids in my house anymore, but I know tons of kids play a ton of time on that. Instead of doing interstitials and popping our logo up on the screen and doing a traditional media buy, the media team took that idea, took that insight, took that campaign idea, and figured out how to create a customized media integration that ended up creating like just huge impact that outweighed kind of even the money we had spent on it. So it's a little bit that expectation that everyone is kind of figuring out how to breathe life into an idea beyond just kind of what would be expected.
Wow. Is that on your website?
I think it is on our website. Yeah, there's probably something in there about that.
I mean, you've just piqued my curiosity and I want to see it. So let's see if we can find it.
So, you know, this campaign was all just about self-expression and how you eat the cheese, these cheese sticks. Yeah.
So you said when you had the campaign idea,
Mm-hmm.
define that, explain that. What do you mean by campaign idea?
Well, the idea and the platform was all about like self-expression and, you know, celebrating tweens kind of, you know, being who they are, snacking how they want, and, you know, kind of switching from talking to moms about how you should put it in your cart because it's relatively healthy and your kids love it. So we wanted to then get into tween space in terms of how we could take this idea of self-expression. It manifested itself, by the way, creatively as animation, where we created a bunch of characters that had names that looked different based on how, in theory, a cheese stick would be eaten, right? We had like a cheese horse that had a mane of like string cheese hanging behind it. And we took that and we went to media partners and said, if this is the idea, how could we work with you to kind of bring this idea to life, you know, on your media platform? So between Twitch and Roblox and doing custom media integrations, we were figuring out how to, like, for example, like you see one of the cheese characters there. We had integrated one of those characters into gameplay on Twitch, which is, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that platform. It's literally people that sit and watch other people play video games and narrate and comment on it.
No,
we had them. Yeah, it's probably a good thing. We had them talking and conversing about, finding that like there was a fridge that they had programmed into the gameplay where you could open it and there was a whole bunch of Frigo cheese heads stocked in it. And then to several people, we gave away actual mini fridges stocked with, so like there was an
Wow.
offline online integration. If you scroll down on this site, I think there might be some, if you scroll down lower, there might be some
as a
more
Wisconsin,
information.
I love the line here. As a Wisconsin, because we're all cheeseheads.
This, yeah, yeah.
There
So
it
you can
is.
see the
There's the
different,
horse.
there's all of this, there's the cheese stick horse. There's the kind of all of the characters. You can see one's been chomped, one's been, been pulled into different ways.
Yeah. So when you say, so again, I just want to clarify, when you say campaign idea, is this something that the media group came up with rather than the creative team?
Oh, sorry.
Or the
No,
or the strategists?
The strategist came up with this idea of self-expression.
Got it.
I think it kind of gave birth to this idea of we're all cheeseheads, and however you want to celebrate how you eat it and who you are. And then I think that was the crux at which, the media team went and said, okay, how do we kind of bring this to life through unique kind of media partnerships?
Okay. So is there competition, healthy competition between the media department, the strategy department, and the creative department, or everybody likes working together?
No, I would say I know it sounds dorky, but it's kind of just collaboration. It's partnership.
That's what I was getting at when I said that.
Yeah.
What I took to be collaboration, I guess I was right. You do work intimately together. I mean, when I was in the agency world, I'm going to come on a screen share here for a sec. When I was in the agency world, and maybe Henry can attest to this, it was a turf war from one department to the next.
Yeah.
You just, I mean, I worked at Team One, and they had a collateral department that did nothing but those 6 and 8 color car brochures,
Oh,
which
yeah.
now nobody does those anymore because it's all online, right? And I worked in the relationship marketing department, and I loved writing long copy. So I thought, let me get an assignment to write some stuff for the brochures. Nope, sorry, you work for the wrong department. And I don't know if that's universal or it's gone bye-bye, but
look, I don't know, it's one
refreshing.
P&L, right? Like it's one P&L,
Yeah.
and like we have a slider capabilities that I love. It does, like every agency has this slide. It says we're a full service agency, and we, list all of the competencies and the resources we have. And the next page says, and we win awards across all of them. And there's, the logos of the Shide Awards for strategy, the One Show, the pencils, the media plan of the year. Like it's, I think that's something we take great pride in, that if you have a good idea and a good brief, it should lead to award-winning work, regardless of whether it's the Webby Awards, Cannes, media plan of the year, Sabres for PR. Like it's the impetus, like if you have a good insight and a good brief, and you can execute it well, it should be able to lead to award-winning work, regardless of the discipline.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that Carmichael Lynch has done from its inception was win not just creative awards, but Effies, the ones that actually move the needle. So that's a testament to not just the good thinking, but the thinking that produces, what we all care about is sales.
We've been trying to fact check this, and I think it's true, but in the full disclosure, no one's been able to tell us it's not true, and we haven't been able to find otherwise. But Subaru is the only brand, to the best of our knowledge, that's won, for sure in the automotive space, maybe Snickers more broadly, but has won the Sustained Success Effie 2 times. And both times have been, under our 16-year tenure on the brand. And that's crazy, because to enter that award, it's sustained success, right? Results in the work deemed impactful over a 5-year period of time behind the same campaign. So to win that 2 times over a 16-year span is pretty cool. And like, that's the word clients like to hear, right? Like it might not be the one that the creative team is going to be the first one to list on their portfolio. But certainly it's what, because it's like, it's not good work just for sake of good work. It's work that's led to good results. So that's been great. I think it's great when you can kind of have longevity with brands and kind of continue to build. We had Jack Links for 12 years and established Sasquatch and that character. We don't work with them anymore, but I mean, brands would die to have that kind of a core kind of DNA to their brand. That's something that already has equity built into it that you can play off of. Harley we had for 34 years, and it's kind of like you said, it hasn't been here now for probably 15, 20 years, but Now I'd be hard pressed to tell you what the tagline of that brand is, what they stand for. But for 34 years, I think people knew, right? It was about rebellion and weekend warriors and, turning that into a brand that no one really cared about into a kind of a brand icon. So those are my favorite stories of the ones that you can do it and you can do it and sustain it over time.
The more I listen to and read from strategists on LinkedIn and other locations on social media, the more I'm intrigued to hear them say, I don't have one way of writing a brief. I mean,
Yeah,
I can
right.
write this one document if that's what you want, which is what I'm hearing some of your
Yeah,
clients
yeah,
do say that. But sometimes it's just a paragraph. Sometimes it's a
yeah,
long, 2 or 3 page document if there's that much information I need to impart. Sometimes it's just a line,
yeah,
but they're flexible enough to be flexible, which I think
yeah.
is
That's right.
remarkable.
Red
And
Robin's
I
one
don't,
of our brands, and it's retail, it's restaurant. So sometimes you got to figure out a promotion, and that you have 2 days. The creative team has 2 days to come up with like what the Veterans Day promotion is going to be.
yeah.
And in that case, we call it, a brief and a tweet. Like it literally needs to be like one sentence, get a team going. Because in those situations, if you take a ton of time on the brief, you're taking any time away from actually coming up with the idea.
Well, one of the things I've always said is not every project requires a brief. Now, if you've got a 2-day turnaround, then you've got to come up with something.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we had John Steele on the show, I don't know, a couple months ago, and his book Truth, Lies, and Advertising quotes. He quoted Sir John Haggerty, who was not Sir at the time, and he said, "What I do is I look for that proposition. How do I judge a good brief? Well, I look for the proposition. I write that down on a piece of paper and I put a picture of the product above or below it and I stick that on the wall.
yeah,
If that proposition and that picture produces what I think is a good ad, doesn't have to be great, just, is it good? Does it tell me what I need to do? Then I say I've got a good brief, and it's my job as a creative to make it better, to go from there and, wherever my creative thinking will take me. So that's just one line. That's one line from a brief, but what you're saying and what I think I admire a lot is that it's like the tweet. It's like this one line. If I can come up with that idea, or at least the beginnings of an idea, there's room there to inspire the creatives. And I quote Henry all the time. He said, my goal is to write an inspiring brief, but if I can't be inspiring, I want to be at least clear, because creatives can
yeah,
work from clear, right?
yeah, yeah. That's true.
And I've said this many, many times, creatives, we love to complain. And we wear our feelings on our shirt sleeves, which is why I say, if you want to make money off of us, invite us to a poker game, because we won't be able to hide that we have a good hand or a bad hand. I'm exaggerating, but not by much. So I'm fascinated by this approach that Carmichael Lynch takes in its briefing. I don't know if that's unique to you. I don't know. Henry,
I've been here for 12 years now, so now I don't even know what other what other plans.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I think it's unique. But I think like it's just hard because I think if there's no inspiration in a brief, and that could be one line or it could be a 20-page deck, and it kind of just depends, right?
Yeah.
You need to there has to be tension though. And I think that's more important than whether it's one page or a brief in a tweet or a 20-page deck, is if there's not tension inherently in the brief and it's so flat, then usually there won't be good work that comes of it.
So you've been in your position now, what, 3-4 months, Chief
Yeah,
Operating Officer?
something like that. Yep.
And you're getting your feel for it. You've been in too many meetings that you want to admit to. Where do you think you're going to be in about a year? What's the plan? What's the hope? What's the dream?
I'm gonna like steal a line from our chief creative officer, Marty Sen, because he said something at an all agency meeting with everyone in town earlier this summer. The folks from Philly, and now of course, like most places, we have folks working remote all over the place. I think we're in 22 states. And he said something that was really interesting, and I'm gonna, like I said, steal it and answering that question. And it's like, instead of thinking about where we're going to be for a year, because all agencies are always like, okay, my goal for this year is to make the agency of the year list, right? he's like, if we kind of reframe that to be, I want to be the agency of the day, the agency of the week, the agency of the month, you can just like, baby steps to say like, how do I own this, creative presentation that's next week? How do I go into this pitch? And if you approach it like that, it feels, less daunting because, whether you're an account person or a creative person, if you approach every day like we want to make Carmichael Lynch the agency of the day today, you're like, oh, I can do that. I know how to like go all in on that and what I need to do and how I need to, sell work and handle client calls. And I think that's a fresh perspective on it. And I think that's what we're just trying to do. Every pitch, every day, every small brief that could turn into a big thing, and seeing opportunities and things that might at their surface not look like, creative opportunities or award-winning work, is what we're trying to do. So.
Well, that's almost a Buddhist approach. Be present be present in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
The path unfolds as you take a step and it disappears as you go away. Stacy Janicki, the Chief Operating Officer at Carmichael Lynch, an amazing agency doing some great work with some great leadership. Thank you for joining Henry and me on the Brief Brothers.
Thanks for having me. It's fun talking to you guys.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
He's Howard Ibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.